A very warm welcome to EdTech Monday Regional Edition. I'm Julie Gishuru, and it's a great pleasure to have you with us once again. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic forced school closures across the continent, and while efforts were made to deliver learning remotely through TV, radio, and other digital means, these have not been a perfect substitute for a number of reasons, including access, infrastructure, and capacity challenges. As schools reopen after what has been a lost year of learning for many students in Africa, the question is, are they ready? How will schools make up for lost classroom time? What investments are needed to ensure children catch up and recover lost ground? And in the wake of regional education disruption, is there an opportunity to fundamentally rethink the nature of school and education delivery to ensure it delivers learning outcomes? In collaboration with the World Bank Group, the MasterCard Foundation EdTech Monday Regional Edition is going to take a look at the issue of school readiness for reopening in the wake of COVID-19. Our incredible panel: Governor of Edo State, Nigeria, His Excellency Honorable Godwin Obaseki; Robert Hawkins, the World Bank's Senior Education and Technology Policy Specialist and Global Lead for Technology and Innovation in Education; Gloria Joseph-Raji, a Senior Economist at the World Bank in Abuja, Nigeria. Thank you so much for making time to be with us. It's been a tough year for so many people, but in particular for education stakeholders and for students, for parents. Now, as we're seeing a lot of schools go back, the question is, are we ready? I want to go around the panel first with just your thoughts on the past year and your thoughts on readiness. Governor, let me start with you. How are you preparing? What are you seeing?
Thank you very, very much. I think from my own perspective, before we talk about readiness, let's think about what has happened. The extent of disruption in our educational system that has occurred in the last 1 year. And that would, help us reflect better and also think about what to do about readiness in reopening schools. First, we have to appreciate that the pandemic is not over. For us in Africa, we're facing a third wave. And so the challenge continues. As we think about reopening schools in the face of the Delta variant for the third wave, which could affect, kids, younger children of school age, unlike the wave 1 and 2, we must think very carefully how we reopen schools, particularly against the background that we do not have the same levels of vaccinations as we've seen in the West and in some other countries. We also need to reflect on how the disruption has affected equity. And because kids from the historically disadvantaged, educationally disadvantaged parts of society seem to be more affected than the kids on the other side. So in reopening, we must think about having to bridge that inequity, which the period of lockdowns and the pandemic has expanded. The lockdowns, affected families and economies, and therefore is raising the prospects of a lot of kids not returning to school and now have to go and support their families to fend for. And so in reopening, we just don't think about opening the doors of the schools. We must think about getting kids back to class. And also we must think about how this whole experience of the last 1 year has not just affected only the learning and the educational pursuit of these kids. We must also think about how it's affected their social emotional well-being, and in some cases their mental well-being. So I guess these are all issues we must bring to play as we think and talk about opening schools, rather than just, before we situate these issues within the context of making up for the learning loss or that occurred in the last 1 year.
Thank you for that. Gloria, let me come to you, your perspective.
Thank you, Julie. Yes, as His Excellency the Governor has mentioned, in the last 1 year, we all know that there have been huge learning losses amongst school-age children. And these are not just short-term learning losses. This, of course, affects the longer-term accumulation of human capital, which has been negatively impacted. And then, like His Excellency also mentioned, this learning loss has not been the same across even a country like Nigeria. So for some segments of the society, you've had the learning losses minimized because this segment of society, and this is the segment at the higher end of the socioeconomic ladder, people who are able to send their kids to private schools, who have better access to remote learning facilities like online platforms, internet connectivity. So these ones have kind of been able to transition into remote learning much easier. And then you have the segment of the society which, the poor and rural areas that do not have access. Even when you talk of the more traditional types of remote learning facilities like radio, television, you're also thinking about electricity availability. And these are the segments of society that are probably, not connected to the electricity grid. The challenge for that segment of society has been huge. And, the learning gap has actually been amplified, by COVID. I think COVID-19 really exposed, this huge divide in our societies, not just across countries, but even within countries. Like in Nigeria, there has been evidence of this divide. So it's been a very, very tough year for education and for learning, just as it's been for all other parts of society. But in terms of, whether we're ready, I think I'll say that is also, that's also not a uniform, I wouldn't give a uniform response to that, because different segments of society, different schools, different states of the country, are at different levels of readiness. And like you said at the beginning, many schools have already resumed. In Nigeria, schools started resuming in October 2020. And by now, some schools have already done a full session post-lockdown. And of course, with different levels of success in trying to mitigate the impact in terms of recovering learning losses, in terms of, facilities for water and sanitation and hygiene facilities that can minimize the spread of disease. So there has been varied levels of success in being ready to take kids back to school. So in brief, that will be my reflection on what has happened and whether we are ready. I would say that we are at varied levels of readiness, even within the country. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks. Bob, let me come to you now and take this question a notch higher. So what I'm hearing from the governor, from Gloria, is look, that this inequity, the divide has, in some ways it gets worse, right? While there were many challenges with education, Africa had made some significant gains, right? But now we're facing highly dynamic, complex situation as we try to deliver quality education to students. When you look at the realities the continent is facing, what are some of the lessons we can carry into how to really try to position ourselves to deliver education, perhaps in more innovative ways? What are some of the key things we can start to think about, the key lessons we've already learned?
Absolutely. Thanks, Julie. It's been a unique and incredible year in the sense that the entire world has faced the same education challenges. And in response to that, we have been working with governments, ministries of education in all of the different countries to respond in a very similar way, from the initial response to the emergency to beginning to look at recovery and now to resilience. And we've developed a strategy paper that details kind of 5 principles. And building off of some of the comments that the governor and my colleague Gloria have made, the first one is ask why. What are the changes that you want to see in the classroom? What are the opportunities and the challenges that you're facing? And throughout the world, the use of technology to be able to just deliver access, which highlights this issue of a new access divide, a digital access divide that all of the countries are experiencing. And the issues around how we might think about now using technology to think differently about how we can deliver education, to be able to offer education to all learners anytime, anywhere, which is, I think, is the aspiration of many countries as they look at these investments they've made during the emergency response and looking at how they can avoid this situation of this access divide in the future and build more resilience into the system. The second principle is for all at scale, which gets to this issue that both Gloria and the governor highlighted around the equity and inclusion issues. And what we found was that many countries were needing to look at multimodal approaches, going back to radio, television, mobile, and then also mixing modalities as well, providing radio instruction, but having a feedback through mobile response, for instance. The other big issue is the importance of human-centered design to really kind of understand what are the types of technologies that respond to all users. And when I say users and stakeholders, this is students, teachers, but also parents as well. And what role parents are increasingly playing and can play through the use of technology in the education of youth. The third principle is empowering teachers, which is another big lesson. Teachers were overwhelmed during this pandemic with more and more responses and without the digital skills to be able to manage the many demands that were placed on them. So what are the opportunities that this provides us to empower teachers more, to be able to take on a new role, to be able to better understand the needs of students, to engage with other teachers and networks so that they don't feel as isolated, be able to bring other stakeholders into the conversation with students. There are many examples where, for instance, under the use of television broadcasts, that teachers together with experts, engineers, journalists, doctors would provide lessons to students. The fourth principle was engaging the ecosystem. The ministries of education can't face this alone. There needs to be a whole of government approach, particularly on the connectivity and digital infrastructure side, but also opportunities to engage with academia, with NGOs, with the private sector, to identify the solution providers that exist in the country. There are some great examples in countries where, for instance, a number of teachers that had YouTube channels that the ministry didn't even know were providing content, that they brought that content together to deliver additional lessons. And then the final principle and lesson that we're conveying to many clients and governments is the importance of being data-driven. That this is a unique opportunity now to be able to collect more data and to be able to personalize learning. In many of our countries, our data systems are very fragmented. There's very little interoperability, and it's very difficult for ministries to be able to effectively use data at a system level, let alone learning analytics at the individual level, to do things such as early warning systems to identify those at-risk students that might drop out of school, as the governor highlighted, and identify them and support them to come back into school. Thanks, Julie.
Thank you. Thank you for taking us through that. And Governor, I come back to you, and I just really want to tap into your willingness as a leader to be bold and really ask the question, is it time, and how are you reframing the thinking around a totally new way of delivering education? Are we really thinking, of the long term? Are we thinking COVID is going to still somehow go away? Are we preparing ourselves for a sprint or a marathon in education and delivery system? So how are you thinking of it? And when you look at mapping a pathway forward, for your constituents, for your people, for your communities. What's on your mind? How bold are you being about this?
I think for us in Edo State, under my leadership, we have been fortunate because about 3 years ago, we took that bold step of reframing education in a state, particularly at the foundational stage, where we decided to introduce technology into our, educational system. We got the technology partners, and we essentially, with the help of the World Bank and partners, we have reframed education by first introducing technology en masse, systems-wide, making sure that we retrain the teachers, we give them the technology devices. So the teachers in the classrooms today have their tablets, their lesson notes are loaded. So we have a bit more control over, the pedagogy and the curriculum and the learning outcomes. And the results are there 3 years after to show that kids are now learning, kids in Edo State are learning almost at 70% of the rate of their colleagues in advanced countries. So we were fortunate in that, from that perspective. And that helped us deal with the challenges that we've faced via COVID. But I think the question you have raised is, okay, what's the purpose of all of this? How, given the very dynamic nature of the world and the education space today, how do we engage the rest of the country? And how do we engage the rest of the continent? I mean, because this is just an oasis, So yes, you can say, well, it's been done in Edo State. Edo State, you have 300,000 kids, who have been monitored. The data on them is, being obtained daily, and we can, use that for planning education outcomes. But what does that mean for the larger whole, for the 20 million kids who are out of school in other parts of Nigeria or on the continent? I mean, is this just not a drop in the ocean? I guess that's the challenge that faces me now as a leader, to say, fine, you've fixed your own bit, but what about the whole?
Yes, what about the whole? And, Gloria, let me come to you with that. This could be the greatest opportunity for the continent really to ensure that even previously, those who were marginalized and outside the system, that we do bridge those gaps. And even as we go forward, we ensure that these new emerging gaps are covered, right? So what do we need to do to really grasp this opportunity and make the significant shifts required? So I come back to bold action, audacious action. What must we do now? And what advice might you have for some of the key stakeholders?
Yeah, so taking it from Edo State, where, the World Bank is supporting the program of the government, and we've always used Edo State as a model for other states. There are 36 states in Nigeria. We've always used Edo State as a model. So like the governor said, pre-COVID, they had already started trying to fix foundational learning. They had started supporting teachers to be able to teach properly, to be able to teach in a uniform way and all of that. And this has involved a lot of investments. And because the World Bank saw, government commitments, the World Bank has prepared a results-based financing program to support what's happening in Edo State. So certainly I would say there needs to be investments and massive investments to really support learning, because it's one thing in Nigeria, access to education, has improved over time in many states, but quality is an issue. So I think there has to be bold steps in terms of investing in quality. I mean, there are segments of Nigeria where access is still a problem. The northern part of Nigeria, where you have a lot of conflict and violence events, and many kids are in internally displaced person camps. Many kids are at home, schools closed down, even not related to COVID. And so you still have access problems in some of those areas. And then, of course, social and gender norms in some parts of the country as well that keep girls at home and do not prioritize education for girls. But I think in terms of quality, we need to do more. I think there has to be a lot of investments in quality. And of course, investments have to be appropriate. They have to be well targeted. So you need to, first of all, understand where we are and what sort of investments, because investments need to be well targeted and well delivered. What sort of investments do we need in different areas? It's going to be different for different states of the country or different countries on the continent. So I think, governments need to really prioritize funding for education. And in particular, funding for teachers' salaries, teachers' capacity building, because I think the evidence is out there that teachers are the most critical factor in the learning process. So I think we really need to come back to investing in our teachers. And Edo State, again, is a model in this regard. So we're also supporting, as part of this program on results-based financing for Edo State, the revamping of teacher training, pre-service teacher training and post and in-service teacher training. So Edo State is remodeling and revamping its colleges of education where teachers are trained before they enter into the service and when they're within the service. So I think, focus on, teacher capacity building. And in the new world where we're going, where we are right now, where, remote learning is no longer a question of if, but a question of how and how best. We need to support teachers, train teachers to be able to deliver, remote learning. So digital skills training for teachers, I think that would really be important. So those are areas of investment that I think that we really need to be thinking about in Nigeria and in Africa.
Thank you for that. Love the emphasis on teachers. They will drive the shifts required in education. If you don't put teachers front and center, it's very difficult to make the changes necessary. Bob, let me come to you now. Some more examples of innovative things that have worked, and just being very cognizant of the fact that we need different things in different spaces. But what have you seen that has been particularly exciting for you?
Yeah, thanks, Julie. A few things. I think one of the great opportunities is to think about learning recovery as something that all of us go through. That this is something that translates both into students that would be going back to school formally, students that are out of school, that have dropped out of the system, and for lifelong learners, students that have graduated from the system. I think what technology can allow us to do is to provide that access anytime, anywhere for any learner for their entire life. And I think that involves a few things. I think one is this new access divide and needing to be able to provide access to content and curriculum. But then also the ability to crowd in networks of humans, because at the end of the day, learning is a social endeavor. We build social capital. We learn from each other. And then finally, this idea of failure, and that we constantly need to failure and learn from those failures. So I think these three elements are exciting. In terms of the technologies, for the first one, obviously there's adaptive learning. This idea that students can enter at a self-paced course, learn a subject, be able to go through some material, get feedback, and adjust. Because one of the major issues we have is we have students in 7th grade math that have a 4th grade level. So bringing students up to the right level. The second is being able to build out that social network, being able to crowd in more individuals, the human connection, which is the theme of our report, of not just one teacher, but how can you crowd in other teachers, including parents, including mentors, coaches, to support students that are out of school, that are in school, to help them think through some of the gaps that they have and some of the challenges, and help them really identify what are some of the life lessons and life goals that they have and they want to learn from. And then finally, this issue of supporting students as they go through this process to be able to be self-reflective and be able to kind of adapt their own learning needs based on kind of what their passions and interests are, and being able to explore a wide range of themes and issues. And themes that are relevant to employment as well, which I think is one of the big challenges, is kind of what are the types of skills that students need to be able to thrive in an ever-changing, complex world, where they're being asked to have skills, not just to learn something and memorize it, but to be able to apply it to real life problems. I think this is an interesting area that technology can facilitate this concept of project-based learning, develop the 21st century skills that are in real demand in countries across the world.
Gloria, let me come to you on this. What are your thoughts on the importance of, thinking wider about issues? What we are teaching students?
Bob touched on the issue of, the relevance of skills, 21st century skills, project-based learning. I think I can't emphasize enough the importance of ensuring that, kids in schools are learning what will be relevant, for their being useful citizens of society. And I think we should begin to think about, curriculum adjustments in that direction. Again, I would mention Edo State. So, the results-based financing operation, that we're supporting the state with, which was recently approved by the board of the bank, not only supports basic education, foundational education, but also digital skills training for youth. Because a lot of youth have left school and they find that their certificates are not useful, in the real world. The demand for digital skills, coding, programming, such skills, 21st century skills, those are a lot of the skills in demand now. And so the other part of the operation, which we are supporting, is this digital skills for youth. So this is something that Edo State had started, and then we are supporting them to scale, to amplify, and to reach more youth in the states. Because half of Edo's population are actually young people. And then you have a high unemployment rate. In Nigeria, right now, unemployment rate nationally is over 30%, and youth unemployment rate is even much higher. So I think there is no overemphasizing of the importance of, the relevance of skills that kids get in school. So I think really we need to be thinking about how to tinker the curriculum to respond to the demands of where we are as a global society.
Thanks for that, Gloria. Bob, you mentioned principles earlier, and one of them was engaging the ecosystem. And as we talk about all of this, the reimagining of education, delivery of what we learn, et cetera, it does take significant work to bring everybody on board. Where does that responsibility lie, and who needs to be doing that work? How do we bring that in?
That's a great question. There are actually 5 principles. The first one, ask why, for all at scale, empower teachers, engage the ecosystem, and be data-driven. But engage the ecosystem, I think the governor has done a fantastic job and has really been a leader on the continent in thinking about where is the innovative talent and how do I construct these partnerships? And I have to say, it starts with leadership. You have to find a leader like the governor who is willing to go out there and look outside of the public system to look for these types of innovations and look for constructive public-private partnerships to be able to facilitate the knowledge that others have and marry that with the needs and the knowledge that the public sector has. And there are great opportunities outside of ministries of education in the public sector to bring others to the table. But it really takes leadership, it takes coordination, it takes thinking through incentives. And I think really the governor probably has more to share on kind of the nuts and bolts of how you do this than I could. But there are great opportunities to be able to, again, identify those solution providers, those that have the knowledge and technology, and be able to facilitate ways in which to support them and work with them to bring their knowledge and technology for the benefit of students, teachers, and the education system.
Thank you, Governor. Let me come straight to you. Maybe take us through, what are you doing? What are you learning in this regard? Like a leader, you just keep acting. But when you listen to people like Bob, want to sit down and frame, all your actions within certain contextual frameworks. What have we learned? We've learned first, it's about the commitment of leadership, that conviction that, look, this is where we need to go. This is what's important for us.
And we had our own imperatives, why we had to do what we did, where you're governing a state where the young people just don't want to stay in the communities. They just want to travel. They want to migrate. They want, at all costs. Then you as a leader forced to think about, what do I do? How do I make home? How do I make home fun? How do I make school fun? And that leads you to look for solutions from the outside. Mm-hmm. I think the second is to just be present in your world, trying to understand what's going around, what's going on and what's happening. I mean, despite the constraints, technology is real, it's our reality. And it's, without technology, I don't see how we can live in the current world. And just absorbing, making sure you are like a sponge and just absorb as much as you can from, what's going on around you, and seeing how you can dynamically, restructure your own existence, your situation to fit with the changes and what's going on around you. The third for us has been what Bob called, engaging the ecosystem. One of the greatest successes we've achieved in the educational transformation in the state, believe it or not, it's been the participation of the communities. That sense of ownership by the communities of the school system. So it's not just, the school is just another government investment or government property. It's owned by the priests, the parents, the traders, everybody feels this is our school. I mean, we need to support it. And so that sense of community ownership and community participation does several things. Apart from just protecting the assets and the sense of ownership, it helps you with feedback. Begin to hear back from the citizens, from people, what they really need, as distinct from what you are, you think they require. But the greatest, for us, the greatest fun for us all, success factor, has been the teachers themselves. Because we had, if you go on YouTube, before I came into office, we knew that we had a problem with the teaching core. In some states, they were totally written off, and you try to fire all of them and hire a whole new generation of teachers. But we were fortunate in the sense that we took a second look and engaged the teachers and tried to train them. Thanks to our technology partners, the pedagogy had changed. Teaching, there were teaching tools that were quite fun for the kids. The teacher didn't have to really, get a cane out to try and get the children to behave. They now had tools like the character board that created incentives for good behavior for kids. So that became fun for kids, for the teachers. And, we did something that was quite instructive. When you introduce such large-scale changes in the educational system, one of the biggest pushbacks come from the teachers and their unions. And how did we overcome this? We did a pilot, and in the pilot, we just said, look, we only wanted volunteer teachers to come and attend the pilots. And, the first 2,000 teachers who attended the pilot training were volunteer teachers. And guess what? On their graduation, it was just electric. And after that, they just found the sense of pride and justification. And, they started calling themselves digital teachers. They said, don't talk to me. I'm a digital teacher. I'm a digital teacher. I'm not an analog teacher. And that just created, a sense of pride. And so when we decided to run the other, streams for training, every teacher wanted it to be digital. And we realized that just with a bit of, the investments, the bit of investment in the teaching core, we just got so much more out of them. I could go on and on and on, but I would say it's a journey. We are not there yet. Yes, at the foundational level, we made success, but that needs to be extended. So the kids are graduating. They just graduated from P6. They're going to be going to junior school in September. The quality and standards and what they used to has to be higher at the next level. And so this change has to be across the entire spectrum, up to the tertiary schools. And that will take quite some investments, as Gloria said, but it's more commitment, because once you're committed and you're clear as to what you want, I'm sure the money will come.
Let me stay with you for a moment. What an innovative solution, get the volunteers in, move with the willing, right? Then you move faster when you move with the willing. And they owned it and they became digital teachers, and all of a sudden you have a movement of sorts building up. Let me bring this approach of problem solving and innovative thinking to the bridge and the divide that we have referred to earlier. And many students who find themselves maybe locked out of physical learning by COVID. And we know many of these are girls. How are you looking at tackling the problem of getting them either back into classrooms physically or back into a system of learning that will be productive and helpful for them?
Yeah, as Bob pointed out, I think the key is data. So we have data on the 270,000 kids in our school system. We know the ones that are females and, the ones that are, more susceptible to being lured out of classrooms. The teachers have been trained to follow up on kids. It's just not only about, gender, but also about issues like violence on kids. And just checking the health, well-being of the kids. The teachers are, taught to watch out for kids who may have been molested, who have, some turbulence at home. And so with data, that availability of data, it's easy to just track what's going on with the kids and then quickly respond and taking remedial actions. For instance, we realized, several months after we introduced technology into the system, that, we were missing a student in class, a very smart female student. And then the assessment team or the quality officers, quality assurance officers, then went around to the parents to begin to look for this child, to find out what had happened to the child. And you know what, after they snooped around, they realized that this 13-year-old had been married off to some man somewhere. And once that was brought to notice of government, clearly we made it a state offense and we went after, we went to the state where the girl had been married off to. And I spoke with the governor and he insisted that kid be given back to us and returned back to class in Edo State. So it's about data. It's also about data and the training you give your teachers so that they don't take their eyes off the ball.
No, amazing story. Thank you for sharing that. Just track every student, every child. Gloria, your thoughts?
Thank you, Julie. So, pre-COVID, girls were already a vulnerable student group, especially in parts of Africa and in Nigeria specifically, because of this gender and social norms that we all know about that, prioritize boys' education above girls' education. And the last demographic and health survey for Nigeria revealed that 40% of girls aged 12 to 17 were out of school. Most of this number are in the northern parts of Nigeria. And so under COVID, girls' education has even grown more at risk for various reasons. We know, for example, that the burden of care for elderly household members or younger household members fall on, females. Where there has been household loss of income, we know that when there's going to be a priority, girls will fall behind. And even, we also know from the evidence what happened in Sierra Leone, in Guinea, in Liberia during the Ebola crisis, that, after the crisis, there was a study in Sierra Leone that showed that girls were 16 percentage points less likely to be in school than boys after Ebola. and you had issues of, teenage pregnancies because of sexual abuse during prolonged stay at home. So girls, have really been endangered. Girls' education have really been endangered, and under COVID, this has even become, higher risk. For the World Bank in Nigeria, we think that, the government really needs to prioritize girls when we talk of education. In the World Bank in Nigeria, within our project portfolio, we have a number of projects that are actually supporting, such initiatives to, incentivize girls to come back to school or to remain in school. The latest project that was approved last year was the Adolescent Girls Initiative for Learning and Empowerment, which supports a number of states to actually, make interventions to support, girl-child learning, scholarships for girls. So that's the way I view it, that, there can be targeted initiatives to incentivize parents to send their girls or keep their girls in school. We know the social norms are there, cultural norms around the female gender are there, but we think gradually, we can begin to, campaign to break down these norms and, support girls being in school.
Thank you. It's been a great conversation. I come to you with a final question. And, it's clear you've been working on this pre-COVID and pre-COVID-19. And, the question is, what's the future for EdTech in Africa? Paint a picture for us. And knowing that there are policymakers across the continent watching, there are leaders across different sectors watching, parents, students, what do we need to know about the role of EdTech? And what could Africa gain if we get this right? Let me start, Bob, with you, and then I'll come to you, Gloria, and we will finish with Governor, please.
No, I think it all starts with skills and kind of how do you prepare youth to participate in a complex, ever-changing environment that they will need to be able to both access the resources, the networks, and the people and expertise to continually improve themselves and reinvent themselves. And that starts with the access divide that we've seen. There is a digital divide, and we need to think through how to connect and provide access for every student in every community. So that's a huge challenge, looking at access to devices, looking at access to connectivity. The second is then the human divide, and being able to support both students and teachers with the skills to be able to access technology and use technology to learn. And then finally, this issue of the purpose of education and being able to support not just students in formal education, but be able to produce this mindset of abundance where anyone, anytime can enter education and continuously learn and engage with others in various networks to develop the relevant skills to support themselves. And these skills will change over time. As we've seen, that the job market is continuously changing and we continuously have to reinvent ourselves. And this gives us the opportunity to not have a fixed, limited mindset, but to be able to offer opportunities to all of Africans to continuously find opportunities and continually grow and recreate themselves. Thanks.
Thank you. Gloria?
Yeah, so for me, I would say, like I said earlier, the question of EdTech is not a question of if anymore. Or when, but really a question of how and how best. So it's upon us. And as Bob just mentioned, we need to prioritize skills for everybody, for the students, for the teachers, even for the parents at home who have to support, students learning at home sometimes. So the issue of skills and the issue of access, the issue of building relevant infrastructure, digital connectivity across countries in schools. So really this is really the time to build education systems that are resilient to the sort of shocks that we have seen brought on by COVID. EdTech will allow learning and education to continue despite school closures. So I'll just say that as the governor had mentioned before about commitment, I think where there is commitment, I think a lot can be accomplished. So commitments on the part of governments, on the part of development partners like the World Bank, I think this is really key. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Governor, you have the final word.
Thank you. I see, what has happened with COVID-19 as Africa's opportunity. Because Africa has that advantage, the demographic advantage to lead the world. And somehow something in me says, you know what, with the disruptions, the scale of disruptions we saw with COVID-19 last year, there is an opportunity. If we could use the digital opportunities to reinvent education in the world, that could give us that springboard on the continent to actually jump ahead. And it comes back to leadership, taking advantage, and you don't need to do much because it's there. The world is just disrupted. Everybody is disrupted. Even the advanced countries, they are all currently disrupted. So what we need to do is just use the opportunity of the disruption we see, use the opportunity of the digital access, bridge that digital divide, because you can't deal with the issue of education out of context of your overall your development. Just vice versa, if you get education right, then you change everything. So there is an opportunity, I see, that this, disruption, it's uncontrolled. Nobody can tell you, what the world will look like in the next, half a decade, because it's just been so unpredictable. So for me, my final word is, look, we have an advantage. It's a demographic one. If we just give the kids a bit more better quality education at the foundational stage, open their minds to the opportunities that the world, that the disruptions are creating, it may just, because we have that youth energy, it may just propel us beyond our imagination.
Thank you so much for that, Governor, and to the whole panel, Gloria and Bob. It's been a great conversation. And the question we ask ourselves as we close this show is, Africa has an opportunity. Can we be bold, audacious, and strategic enough to help it transform the continent for the better? Thank you all so much. See you again next month on EdTech Monday.